If you crack the code of your enemy's military, weaknesses are exposed and victory becomes inevitable. Ukraine knows that. The momentum it has built in 2026 rests on a deep understanding of everything from Russian strategy to the military equipment and systems Moscow has in place. But now Ukraine is going to blow everything up. Ukraine hasn't just cracked Russia's biggest military systems, it's exposing them to every single enemy that Putin faces. In a genius move, Ukraine just gave NATO the keys to Russia's entire arsenal. Secrets have been exposed. Strategies for dealing with Russia can be created. Russia's weapons have just been turned against the very country that has been using them against Ukraine for more than 4 years. How? TrophyLab. That's the name of a new Ukrainian database that contains deep technical data about all of the Russian weapons that Ukraine has been forced to face since February 2022. Ukraine's defense minister Mikhailo Fedorov shared the details in an X post announcing the launch of this new database. Ukraine launches TrophyLab. We are opening access to captured Russian weapon technologies for our global partners. Every missile, drone, and vehicle seized on the battlefield is now a source of knowledge for the free world, Fedorov declared. This is already huge for so many reasons that we're going to break down, but there's more. According to Ukraine's defense minister, allies won't just have access to a few files offering technical specifications. They'll be able to access the very weapons that Ukraine has retrieved directly, enabling further study that can be fed back into the database for all to see. Through this secure platform, allied governments, labs, and defense tech manufacturers gain access to deep technical data, reports, and vulnerabilities. Users can also request physical equipment for testing, significantly shortening the development cycle for countermeasures, Fedorov adds. What we're seeing here is very simple. Ukraine has cracked the code on dozens of Russian weapons, which is what has allowed it to stay one step ahead of Putin. Now, Ukraine is gearing up to share all of that information with the sorts of allies that have more money, more equipment, and, crucially, aren't working within an active war zone to further expose the flaws in all of Russia's weapon systems. This is going to be a two-way street. Ukraine exposes what it knows, its allies build on that knowledge database, and everybody who stands against Russia benefits. Putin will be absolutely fuming. Once again, Ukraine has pulled something out of the hat that Russia's president could never see coming, and all he can do is watch as secrets that were never supposed to be revealed on the global stage fall right into the hands of Russia's enemies. And what will really make Putin's blood boil is that Ukraine gets to rub some salt into Russia's wounds. TrophyLab wouldn't be possible if Russia had never invaded Ukraine. And as Putin orders yet more assaults on the ground and strikes from the air, the database that Ukraine has created will only get stronger. After all, strikes leave debris behind. And that's what Ukraine can claim and study to learn more about Russian weapons. The great irony here is that Russia's strategy is going to become its undoing, specifically on the drone and missile fronts. Putin has leaned heavily into both of these types of weapons as Russia's ground campaign falters. France 24 reports that May alone saw Russia launch 8,150 strike drones at Ukraine, which is a record, along with 211 missiles and thousands of guided bombs. All of these weapons would leave debris behind. Shells, casings, chips, all valuable information that can reveal what Russia builds, how it builds it, and what can be used to counter the weapon in question. When that debris falls into the hands of technically minded people who can pick it all apart, massive secrets are exposed. Frankly, Putin should have known that Ukraine, of all countries that he might target, would be capable of picking Russia's weapons apart. He's seen the constant innovation from Ukraine firsthand during his so-called special military operation. He might also know, as the National Academies of Science, Engineering and Medicine points out, that Ukrainian science and engineering accounted for between 13 and 15% of the former Soviet Union's research and development potential. Ukrainian scientists would have known what Russia was building right up until the early 90s. They may have even worked on many of the weapons that Russia is using right now. Attack the technically minded and you get exposed. TrophyLab is going to unpack every military secret that Russia wants to keep hidden. Ukraine has been preparing this initiative for quite some time. On May 28th, Euromaidan Press reported that Ukraine's cabinet of ministers had adopted a set of new rules related to the handling of Russian military equipment. Those rules outlined procedures for how captured Russian equipment would be transferred and, crucially, created a legal framework for how the information derived from these weapons could be used to develop Ukraine's defenses and enhance international cooperation. Though Fedorov made mention of trophies at the time, the move was initially seen as a way for Ukraine to streamline its use of captured and abandoned Russian equipment to serve its own defensive needs. But with TrophyLab, Ukraine has revealed something much bigger. And what Russia's enemies have now is a massive windfall of information, built on years of Ukraine's struggle. That information is now at the fingertips of Western nations and defense companies, and it can be used to develop weapons that counter Russia's most dangerous assets. That's huge for both NATO and Ukraine, as we're going to explain in a few minutes. However, there's the little matter of how TrophyLab is going to work to cover first. Here's what we know so far. Fedorov has already covered some of the basics. TrophyLab will serve as a shared repository of Russian weaponry, and it includes practically everything that Ukraine has been able to get its hands on. That means missiles, drones, abandoned vehicles, and plenty of other systems that Russia has used and left behind in Ukrainian territory. The database isn't open to everybody. Anybody who wants access must apply, but once they have access, that user can download technical documentation, access studies and reports, and even request that Ukraine send them samples of the weapons in the database for direct study. We also have some numbers. The TrophyLab official website says that the initial version of the database will include more than 115 samples, all of which have been captured on the battlefield and then transferred to Ukrainian facilities for research. Those samples are broken down into a catalogue that has 79 equipment categories and subcategories. The latter also allows Ukraine to highlight specific components and materials used in Russia's weapons. So it's not just the weapons themselves that are being exposed, it's the specific components used to make them. Ukraine will also make more than 225 completed studies provided by laboratories, scientific institutions, and engineering centers available. What we see here is a platform of research from which far more can be done. Ukraine has managed to compile all of this information, even as it's defending itself against Russia and being pelted by long-range attacks. That's impressive. And when you learn about some of the weapons that are going to be exposed via this database, it also shows just how far Ukraine is willing to go to create a resource that benefits every enemy of Russia. In its report on TrophyLab, Defense News reveals that among the 115 captured samples are Kinzhal hypersonic missiles and Russia's T-90M main battle tank. These are among the best weapons that Russia has. Now Putin's foes can read all about them, or those foes can get direct access to these samples for their own study. Defense News says that verified partners can request samples for physical testing, with the nature of that testing dependent on what the partner wants to discover. Non-destructive inspection is likely to be the most common. However, TrophyLab also allows partners to apply for samples that they can disassemble or even put through full destruction testing. The latter could prove especially valuable to anybody trying to develop countermeasures and electronic warfare devices designed to take out Russia's weapons. As for applications, they're open right now. That doesn't mean anybody can send across their details. Well, that's not strictly accurate. The TrophyLab website has a registration page, and anybody watching this could try to fill out the form. However, the form makes it clear that only foreign government institutions and defense companies can apply. Plus, Ukraine requests several documents and signed letters to assure no conflict of interest and to aid in its vetting process. So you could try to apply, but you'll be filtered out, as will any entity that tries to get around the process that Ukraine has in place. That means Russia isn't going to be able to learn what Ukraine knows about its weapons. There will be no tweaking based on the information in Ukraine's database for Putin. Ukraine has all of the mechanics in place. But now that we know how TrophyLab is going to work, we move on to the even bigger question: why does this new database matter so much? Before we dig into the answers, this is a reminder that you are watching The Military Show. If you're getting insight from the channel, then remember to subscribe so you can catch more of our daily videos. We'll start with the obvious. The emergence of TrophyLab is massive for Ukraine, as it tries to build deeper ties with its allies, especially those that are in NATO. Fedorov makes that clear as he points out that Russia is using its entire arsenal against Ukraine, and that Ukraine has been systematically taking the parts of that arsenal it's captured apart so that it can learn how to stop them. NATO needs that information. The Collective Defense Alliance and its members have already delivered a huge amount of support to Ukraine, and they are always looking to do more. The Secretary-General of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, Benedetta Berti, made that clear on June 17th, noting that 99% of the military assistance that Ukraine receives comes from NATO allies, and that reaffirming the organization's support for Ukraine is a priority ahead of a planned NATO summit to be held in Ankara from July 7th to July 8th. TrophyLab is one of Ukraine's ways of giving back to the NATO alliance. And it shows that the relationships between Ukraine and its NATO allies are far from one-way streets. Ukraine is exposing secrets that are going to massively aid NATO's own defense of its interests against Russia. And frankly, TrophyLab couldn't have come at a better time. At the end of 2025, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte pointed out that Russia is escalating its hybrid warfare tactics against alliance members, and he suggested that Russia could well strike a NATO nation within 5 years. That amounts to a deadline of the end of 2030, or perhaps before, for NATO to get its act together and prepare the sort of defense it will need to guard against Russian aggression. Some say that the timeline is even narrower than Rutte suggests. Germany's Defense Minister Boris Pistorius is one of them, as he claims that German experts say it can happen in 2029. This is apparently a consensus opinion held by several NATO members, Canada's CBC reports, and it's backed by moves that Russia is making right now. Infrastructure allowing for the deployment of up to 115,000 troops on the Nordic and Baltic borders is being put in place to directly threaten NATO's eastern and northern flanks. Russia has been testing nuclear weapons processes in Belarus. Even though he is embroiled in a war against Ukraine that is anything but going according to plan, Putin is digging himself into an even deeper hole of aggression, and NATO is the obvious target. With all of that in mind, NATO needs as much information as it can get about Russian weapons and tactics. TrophyLab will provide it. This treasure trove will allow NATO's members to develop countermeasures against Russia's weapons that perhaps haven't been imagined before. Obviously, this is important for NATO, but for Ukraine, it may also mean that innovators outside of its own territory could come up with concepts that could be used to counter Russia. And there's nothing that Putin can do about any of this. Every attack that Russia launches, be it on the ground or aerial, provides an opportunity for Ukraine to capture more trophies and share more data with NATO. The only way this flow of information can be stopped is if Putin brings an end to his invasion. That isn't going to happen. Every day from the launch of TrophyLab is going to be a day when more of Russia's biggest secrets get exposed to and by the very people who shouldn't be seeing that information. That's not just dangerous for Russia, it's humiliating for a leader who has so long positioned himself as the only one who can defend Russia against NATO. But beyond all of this, TrophyLab is just another example of something that Ukraine has been doing for a while now. All of the battlefield experience Ukraine has earned through its own sacrifices during Russia's invasion is being turned into a transferable asset that makes Ukraine more valuable to its partners than ever before. TrophyLab may be the culmination of Ukraine's knowledge sharing, but it's far from the only example. In 2026 alone, we have learned that Ukraine has provided more than 500,000 hours of footage shot by its drones that is now being used to train AI systems that will be installed into yet more drones. These frontline videos show how Russian weapons can be targeted and provide insight into the tactics that Russia uses. On the AI training front, they also allow autonomous systems to identify targets, enabling them to strike without human intervention. What makes the Ukraine footage especially valuable is that it's real. You get every weather condition, every terrain type, every unpredictable scenario that a simulation can't replicate, says Peter Kant, who is the CEO of a company called Enabled Intelligence, which has been using this wellspring of footage in its work. And that's the big point. All of this knowledge is battle-tested by Ukraine, which makes it far more valuable than simulations and assumptions. We're also seeing plenty of evidence of Ukraine's ability to turn its experience into a transferable asset in the Gulf region. After the US launched Operation Epic Fury against Iran, the Gulf nations surrounding Iran found themselves under regular attack from Iranian Shahid drones and missiles. Both are weapons that Russia has been using against Ukraine, which suddenly made the expertise Ukraine holds extremely valuable to nations that might have never engaged Ukraine as a defense partner in the past. Sure enough, Ukraine sent over 200 drone experts to the Gulf region to show the likes of Qatar and Saudi Arabia how to defend themselves against the Iranian drone threat. This outreach has resulted in Ukraine signing decade-long defense partnerships with 3 Gulf nations, including the 2 nations we just mentioned, and the United Arab Emirates. Will those nations gain access to TrophyLab? Maybe. And if they, along with all of Ukraine's Western allies, make full use of this new database, then Russia faces the prospect of a literal global research effort focused entirely on neutralizing every weapon that is used in Ukraine. This is all a consequence of Putin's actions. If he hadn't invaded Ukraine, all of this information could have remained secret. Russia would have been able to maintain the illusion of being one of the world's foremost military powers, and nobody would have been the wiser. But Russia's incompetence has already been exposed by more than 4 years of failure in Ukraine. And now the very weapons that Russia uses have been mined for transferable information, with Ukraine at the heart of it all. Again, Russia is caught in a trap. The more it fights, the more information goes to Ukraine, and the stronger Ukraine's alliances become with its partners. TrophyLab is now the conduit for a catastrophe of Putin's own making. It's also a symbol of Ukraine becoming a power player in the global defense industry. For much of the war, Ukraine has been positioned as the recipient. Now that situation has changed. While Ukraine still receives plenty of aid, as demonstrated by a $4 billion commitment made to its defense by several NATO nations at the June 18th Ramstein format meeting, Ukraine can now give as good as it gets. Ukrainian drone diplomacy is what enabled it to form its agreements in the Gulf region, for instance. TrophyLab may end up being the catalyst for yet more partnerships, in which Ukraine provides the information and then allies build the weapons. But there's potential for so much more due to the aspect of TrophyLab that allows allies to inspect Russian weapons themselves. Maybe it will be the allies who come up with the ideas, and Ukraine builds and tests them on the battlefield. This is symbiosis between Ukraine and its partners. Formerly one-way relationships now have a very clear give and take, which has established Ukraine as an invaluable partner to all those who support the nation in its defense against Russia. And when it comes to Russia and Ukraine, we're seeing Putin's influence fade as Ukraine's influence grows, and it's all happening in real time. Russia has lost key allies around the world, including Venezuela, Iran, and Syria, due to leaders that Putin propped up being ousted. But Ukraine's influence now is stronger than it's ever been. Nations that might have once looked toward Russia for help with their defense are turning toward Ukraine. Putin's war has achieved the exact opposite of weakening NATO, and Ukraine is now critical to ensuring that NATO becomes stronger than ever. Putin's worst nightmares are all coming true. And as Russia's weapons are exposed and Ukraine ensures that Russia can't even discover what has been learned about these weapons, Putin has to face the fact that his efforts to divide have only led to more unity. Ukraine has become what Putin always feared. Now NATO has the keys to the entire Russian arsenal. Russia's latest humiliation is on the verge of being launched. TrophyLab is an exposé of the failure of the Russian military unlike any other. But Russia should be used to getting egg on its face when it comes to its weapons by now. After all, it spent billions on a supposed fifth-generation stealth fighter, only to generate results so pathetic that they reveal just how far Russia is behind the US and China. The Su-57 is all hype and no follow-through, and you can find out why if you watch our video. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to The Military Show to see more of our reporting on the latest developments in Ukraine. And thank you, as always, for watching.